This is the Amazon rainforest, where the waters flow toward the greatest river on Earth. And not far below this scene, there is an enormous wealth of oil. Over 23 years, Texaco, now owned by Chevron, along with Ecuador's national oil company, pumped 1.5 billion barrels of that oil. Trouble is, when the drilling was finished, toxic oil pits were left behind for decades.
It's a disgrace. They treated Ecuador like a trash heap.
Chevron is America's third largest company, behind ExxonMobil and Walmart. One way it became that big was by buying Texaco in 2001, and now that purchase of Texaco has pulled Chevron into a titanic struggle in the Amazon. The people who live in a remote region of Ecuador are suing Chevron, saying reckless oil exploration poisoned the most important rainforest on Earth. Soon, a judge in a tiny Ecuadorian courtroom will decide whether the oil company must pay as much as $27 billion in damages. That would make this the largest environmental lawsuit in history. Most everything is in dispute in this bitter struggle except one thing. Powering American cars with Amazon crude has left a toxic legacy. This is the Amazon rainforest, where the waters flow toward the greatest river on Earth. And not far below this scene, there is an enormous wealth of oil. Beginning in the 1960s, Texaco came to northeastern Ecuador to tap into one of the largest oil reserves in the Americas. Texaco was a partner with Ecuador's national oil company, Petroecuador. And over 23 years, Texaco pumped out 1.5 billion barrels of oil. Hundreds of wells were drilled, and at each well site, pits were dug to hold toxic oil waste that comes up during drilling. Generally, 2 or 3 pits were carved out near the well site. Trouble is, when Texaco finished its drilling, the waste pits were abandoned by the hundreds and for decades. Manuel Salinas' house is next to one of those pits. He's one of 30,000 people suing Texaco's owner, Chevron. He says the pollution leaked into his water well.
It's a disgrace. They treated Ecuador like a trash heap.
We have a little stream here.
Doug Beltman worked for the EPA on Superfund sites in the U.S. He's now the scientific expert for the people suing Chevron.
Are you saying that Texaco never could have gotten away with this in the United States?
No, absolutely not. It wouldn't have happened in the United States. And if it had happened, they wouldn't have gotten away with leaving it here for 30 years.
In Texas, for example, pits like this one are supposed to be temporary, isolated from fresh water, and soon after, emptied and backfilled. But in Ecuador, this pit has been here for 25 years, and we found it's actually designed to overflow into streams.
They put these pipes in the side, so as it rains, it fills up with water, contaminated water, it just dumps out into the jungle.
Well, it rains here in the rainforest all the time, so there's water pouring out of it now. And if you smell the water, you can clearly smell the oil pollution in it. Runs right down the ravine where you are and right down into the stream, not 50 yards down that way. When we stirred the bottom, oil floated to the top. Texaco left Ecuador in 1992, and today, Texaco's owner, Chevron, says the pollution is now the responsibility of Petroecuador, Texaco's former partner. That dispute is the heart of the lawsuit. The people who live in this river society call themselves Los Afectados, the affected ones. They use the waterways for washing clothes, bathing, and drinking. Texaco acknowledged that it dumped into the rainforest billions of gallons of what's called production water. Production water is waste that comes up with the oil. In fact, it's often salty and laced with chemicals. We traveled downriver in search of an Indian tribe which is part of the group suing Chevron. For centuries, this has been the territory of the Sequoias.
Buenos días.
Mucho gusto, Humberto Piaguaje.
Me llamo Scott.
We sat with 2 of their leaders who said they had never seen oil until it was on the river. Humberto told us oil looked like flowing black blankets, and ruin the fishing. The Sequoias took us to their community hut, where we saw the driving force behind the suit, Stephen Donziger, a New York lawyer, far from home.
These are people who never believed they had a right to sue an American company in their own court system.
Yeah, but you know what Chevron says. They say that this is being driven by a New York plaintiff's lawyer, and they don't mean that as a compliment.
I'm well aware of that. They've taken out advertisements in the Ecuadorian press with my name trying to attack my reputation.
What do you think of that?
Well, I think that it puts me in the membership, frankly, of a very distinguished club of people.
Make no mistake, Donziger would be wealthy if he wins, but he says that most of the money would go to environmental cleanup. Why $27 billion? Well, that astounding figure comes from this man, Richard Cabrera. Cabrera is a geological engineer appointed by the Ecuadorian court who conducted field inspections to assess the oil damage.
$27 billion. I mean, come on, where does he come up with that number? It's huge.
It's huge, but in my analysis, it's still only pennies on the dollar compared to the damage done here.
Cabrera figured $9 billion should go to cleanup, plus new health and water systems. He says another $9 billion should compensate for cancer deaths, even though the lawsuit doesn't make any cancer claims. Sylvia Garrigo is Chevron's manager of global issues and policy. She argues that the court's expert is biased.
That report and Mr. Cabrera are part and parcel of the fraud that is being perpetrated against an American company in Ecuador in this corrupt and politicized judicial system.
When she says politicized, she points to the top, to Ecuador's president, who visited the waste sites and called the people who brought the suit heroes. It's a message, Garrigo says, that can't be lost on the judge.
Do you think that this judge is going to feel any independence, is going to look at the rule of law, is going to look at the contracts, is going to look at the evidence and determine what's legitimate and illegitimate?
So who is the $27 billion judge? We found Juan Nunez in his court on the third floor of this shopping mall in the Amazon town of Lago Agrio. Texaco named the town for Sour Lake, Texas, where Texaco got its start. Nunez struck us as serious and thoughtful. He's been on the case for a year, and he's been out to the waste pits. The verdict will be his decision alone. There is no jury.
Chevron says that they can't get a fair trial in your court.
No es así.
That is not the case. I believe that justice has to be given to everyone as they deserve, like a good father of a family, to give a child what a child is entitled to.
How did Chevron find itself in a jungle town at the mercy of one judge? Because it got what it asked for. This is Manhattan, and in 1993, the Amazonians first filed suit in a U.S. federal court. It was Stephen Donziger's first big case, and it sat here for 9 years while Texaco pressed this argument.
Texaco's position is quite clear. This matter belongs in Ecuador.
Texaco wanted to be in Ecuador, you wanted to be in New York, and you lost.
Yes, we lost.
You think Texaco expected you to go away?
I do.
They didn't. And in 2003, on the first day of the trial in Lago Agrio, Chevron's lawyer, in his opening argument, said the Ecuadorian court didn't have jurisdiction to try the case.
You wanted to go to Ecuador.
We didn't want to get sued,
Now you say
period.
you don't want to be in Ecuador.
No.
What court do you want to be in?
We don't want to be in any court, much less a court with respect to this kind of a claim, which we consider frivolous.
Chevron says it can't be sued because of a 1990s agreement Texaco struck with the Ecuadorian government to clean up some of the contaminated sites that had been abandoned for years.
Texaco spent $40 million cleaning up some of these sites. In return for that, the Ecuadorian government signed off and said you're released of liability. How can you have a lawsuit now?
Well, our clients never released Texaco. That's the critical distinction. That was an agreement between the government and Texaco. We were not part of that agreement, and we're not bound by that agreement.
Although it's not specifically written into the agreement, Chevron claims it's responsible for only 40% of the cleanup because Texaco was a 40% partner with Ecuador's national oil company, Petroecuador. Chevron says anything left behind now is PetroEcuador's problem.
That 60% is the sole responsibility of one company and one company alone, and that is PetroEcuador.
PetroEcuador, which has been running oil operations since Texaco left in 1992, is cleaning up some of Texaco's old pits, slowly, but other pits remain like open sores in the rainforest. While Texaco was a minority partner back in its day, it was the operator in charge of the oil fields, and under U.S. environmental law, for example, the operator can be held responsible for the pollution.
You say you had a 40% share in the consortium, but Texaco was doing 100% of the oil production out there. I mean, this is Texaco's.
Let me tell you about Texaco's 100% production. That's the biggest falsehood that I've heard in terms of revenues in this case.
Who built the pits?
The consortium.
Which company built the pits?
Texaco was the operator.
What does that mean, to be the operator?
It means that the consortium partners have selected you to operate the oil fields, to build well sites and production facilities.
So Texaco built the pits?
I respectfully disagree, Scott. The consortium built the pits. This area here to my left.
Chevron's Sylvia Garrigo showed us some of the pits that Texaco fixed. Trees and grass stand today above what used to be waste pits. Chevron says Texaco cleaned 162 pits, but the court expert Richard Cabrera puts the total number of all waste pits at 916. Chevron says that number is inflated, so we asked Chevron for a master list of all the pits that existed when Texaco left Ecuador. But last week, Chevron told us there is no master list. And there are questions about what was cleaned up. Cabrera tested some of the remediated sites and found oil contamination higher than Ecuadorian regulations allow. Chevron has done its own tests.
In the thousands of soil and water samples that we have taken in the Amazon, there has been no detection of any type of toxin that is not naturally occurring in the environment and that is dangerous to human health or the environment.
Oil is naturally occurring in the environment. It just depends on where it is.
I have makeup on and there's naturally occurring oil on my face. It doesn't mean that I'm going to get sick from it.
Having called the country corrupt, the court biased, and the case a fraud, Chevron seems to have come to a conclusion.
What do you think your chances are of winning this case?
In Ecuador? Very little.
Judge Nunez is expected to rule soon. He'll decide whether Chevron is liable, and if so, how much of that $27 billion the company should pay. Chevron has no assets in Ecuador. How do you expect to collect?
In the end of the day, it might be a situation where a U.S. court enforces the judgment and the marshals have to go to Chevron and seize their assets.
There are likely to be appeals in this case that has already run nearly 16 years. In the meantime, environmental damage continues in this largely unseen part of the world. On our way out of the forest, we just happened on a major oil pipeline break. It wasn't Chevron. It wasn't PetroEcuador. This time it was a Chinese-led consortium. But it reminded us of what the Sequoia Indians said about black blankets on the rivers. People say oil and water don't mix, but in the Amazon, it's hard to keep them apart.